I'd like to start my questions by complimenting your team on the presentation. It was very good. Of course, it's easier to critique than to create. So I do have some questions. The flying wind turbine, as you called it in your, or aerostat wind generator. It was a novel concept to me, even though Acere is quite involved with wind generation. Is there any non-commercial application of this?
Well, they have this company in Canada known as a Magen air rotor system. The picture that we showed earlier of the aerostat itself is from their company. Obviously, we modeled ours differently because theirs is focused on helium, because they have helium readily available, and they're not combining with an energy storage system. So here we go. So that's an actual commercially available aerostat. The negatives are obviously related to the same negatives typical wind turbine would have. You know, they're not storing any energy unless they use a battery array. So intermittency is still a big issue. And even in America, there is a helium shortage occurring because helium is used in a lot of different fields. I didn't know this before, but it's used in MRIs very extensively. So it's a very big part of the medical field also. And even in America, who produces so much helium, it's a big issue. So coupling it with hydrogen and a hydrogen energy storage system just makes a lot of sense. And that's the alteration we did. It has been tested extensively in Canada. We just don't have any graphs about it, but we talked about it in the paper.
Okay. Questions, and these are essentially details. You do need a surge protection for the high flying.
Okay, well, by surge protection, I think that's more of an issue for
lighting.
Oh, for lightning, you mean?
Lightning.
Well, okay, the benefit we have by our design is that in the case, it would have to be a really random lighting because you could predict some type of storm, you could bring it down. But the protection it does have is that it's held by a steel tether, which worst case scenario would transmit the power to a ground. And that would relieve any lightning effects in that sense. But we would like to be proactive and prevent that from happening by lowering the aerostat whenever such a scenario arises.
Okay. The last question, so that I don't harass you too much.
It's totally okay.
In the equipment that you listed, didn't have any transformers. I presume that the generation is at the utilization power that is being injected into the line?
Well, we didn't take transformers into account because we consider that part of the existing infrastructure, and we would like to take advantage of those instead of installing completely new ones. But the reason we avoided that also was because we're storing the energy, so we would be able to transmit it. We'll be able to release the energy at any required voltage. It's not being directly put into the grid from the aerostat itself. So you won't have an intermittent electrical source. It'll be a constant current of electricity according to what the infrastructure requires.
So maybe I misread it. So essentially you're generating hydrogen, which is then used as a fuel. You're not generating power to inject in the grid and the excess power being used to store hydrogen? Yeah,
the issue about injecting the power directly is that it's never consistent. There's always fluctuations. So, I mean, if it's a large-scale farm, which we're not doing, it'd be if there's a lot of distributed stations and the infrastructure could handle it, then you'd be directly putting it into the grid. But the infrastructure that Cuba currently has would have to be able to withstand that surges in power, and that may not be the case all the time. I know Cuba, in a lot of different locations, have transformer issues, transformers blowing up and stuff like that due to their age or their original design. And having the electricity be directly into the grid could cause issues. So we would be using the electricity generated, and then any surplus that is generated would be stored as hydrogen in the hydrogen tanks.
Okay. Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Good morning and congratulations. My question is going to be just for my edification. I want to understand. It's two parts. The first one is, why did you guys choose this particular type of innovation? Number one. And number two, in your written presentation, you talked about the cost. You did a full analysis of the cost. And when I read it, and I interpreted it as $12,332 per site, including the storage.
Yeah.
It seemed very low to me.
Okay.
So can you expand a little bit more about that? Because it seems, at least from my perspective, that this is a great value for dollars. So.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, the reason why we went with aerostat over traditional wind turbines was we pretty much wanted something that could be moved. So traditional wind turbines, you put it here and it's there forever. We also spoke about environmental problems that arise from wind turbines, traditional wind turbines. And we pretty much focused this on the decentralized power grid. We wanted to decentralize the power. So what theoretically could happen is that we could have a Magen or a blimp pretty much in different locations, which can be portable. So let's say tomorrow you want to build something and our cables are in the way. We could just take it down, move it somewhere else, and put it there. So it's pretty much for adaptability that we went with this design over pretty much anything else.
Yeah, Cuba's an ever-changing country. In terms of infrastructure being, as we showed in our first slide, that power plant being adapted to natural gas. For the finances part of the question, the reason it seems low is because we initialized one prototype for our introduction to a pilot program in Isla Juventud. There's one site. It's only, if you look at the numbers, it's a 10 kilowatt wind turbine, which is small compared to the wind farms they have in Cuba. They currently have some that are, I think, upwards of 750 kilowatts. But it is, again, an introduction and a pilot program to test and make sure everything runs smoothly. And obviously, the design could be scaled up and be made a lot bigger. However, we wouldn't want to scale it that much because we want to stick to a decentralized approach. You know, if you scale it really large and it gets damaged, you just lost a chunk of power that could have been prevented. So we like the small approach a lot better.
A great presentation, and I think it's it's kind of an innovative idea to solve some of the problems that they have. I just had a question on the exhibit on the wind power. Looking at it, a couple of things that you can answer for me. When you talk about moderate, what does that relatively mean? And also looking at the exhibit, I guess most of these would have to be located on the coast because according to your exhibit is where I guess you have the better winds. And also, or offshore, have you considered trying to locate them offshore? Because at least in one area is where it looks to be the best location for it. I mean, can you answer those questions?
Yeah, I think you're looking into Guantanamo Bay, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, one of the benefits that this has is you could take a slight advantage of, because of the way Cuba's, the natural sources of Cuba are, a lot of its wind is off coast. And that's why we wanted to introduce it to Isla Juventud because it's land-based. But it could be adapted for, in the future ramifications of it, to offshore wind. Obviously, that has a lot of additional consequences. You have to be able to control it offshore, but I think it would make a lot less of an impact compared to a traditional wind turbine. It would be a traditional wind turbine would be completely at risk to high swells and hurricanes, and that might be one of the reasons Cuba hasn't looked into that as much. But one of the benefits of our design is the way it works. You can, depending on the wind direction of that day and the scenario, the tether could actually hang over to the offshore side. You know, it's not a central post, so it could swing towards the direction in the offshore sense while still being land-based. So that's one possible scenario, and then other possible scenarios are to use it offshore. However, a lot of updates would have to be considered for a foundation, because it still has to be held to the ground in some form to be able to transmit the power.
Okay, I have a few questions also. First, great presentation, and selecting an alternative source that Cuba's already using, so that gives an advantage. You know, there may be some people that will be able to operate the facility or be more familiar with it. I guess my questions revolve around some logistics. It appears the turbine, to bring that down would be very easy.
We're using an electrical winch, actually.
Exactly. And you talk about moving it around. How moving the turbine itself would be very easy. What about your hydrogen facility?
Yeah. Here we go. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. The way this one's designed, for example, this one was for a 2-megawatt system, actually. So that's a lot of power compared to our system. Our system would actually probably fit within one of these containers, the whole thing: compressor, winch, hydrogen storage tanks, electrolyzer, the whole thing. And a shipping container is a lot easier to move around when compared to this wind turbine over here. That's going to stay there. So in that sense, the stuff on the ground will be relatively easy to move. It has no, I mean, it'll have a concrete foundation in a sense to hold the shipping container so it doesn't sink. But other than that, the shipping container can be moved around.
So theoretically, just load it on a truck and move it to.
Yeah, and I mean, the hydrogen is also very portable. So let's say in some terms of an emergency site, let's say power lines are down in an emergency, and there's hydrogen generators across the country, yet there's no hydrogen for it. You can move around the hydrogen tanks too, without having to carry around the rest. So that's another possibility.
And by decentralizing it, and let's say you have 10 of these implemented, have you guys put any thought to connecting them via telemetry or something like that, so they could be remotely monitored or controlled?
Okay, the control they would have, for example, in this system, they talk about, they have a battery control system. It doesn't mention, I think this might be the smart grid system, but usually what they have is they program it in a sense so that when certain conditions arise, yeah, you could control it remotely. Obviously, that's future ramifications. We didn't consider it in our pilot prototype because we just want to make sure the concept functions well in Cuba and is introduced and it's public accepted. But that's definitely future ramifications and stuff to consider.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions?
Thank you so much. We're gonna go and move on to the second team. Thank you, Acere. And please, if you can raise your prototype for everybody to see.
I mean, after all the presentations, you guys could all take a closer look at it. But our prototype specifically models the generator assembly. This represents the motor, the generator back here. This is the generator housing. These are the gear ratios that transmit the rotations per minute from the blimp to the motor at a 1:25 ratio. We just wanted to make sure everybody got that concept well, and that's why we have this model.
Thank you.
Thank you.